imprisonment and a fine of 200 million rupiah with subsidiary of 2 months detainment in the Hambalang project.
And welcome, this is the TVR English News Service bringing you the latest news from home and also parts of the world. I'm Doni Kusman Haji, and those were today's headlines, and we'll begin with our first report from Jakarta. President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono said that the Indonesian government is ready to be actively involved in the international investigation of the Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 crash after it was allegedly fired with missile in the eastern Ukraine region.
On my personal behalf and on behalf of the people of Indonesia, I would like to express my deepest condolences and sympathies for the tragic incident relating to Malaysian Airlines Flight MH17 yesterday, the 17th July 2014, during its flight from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur. According to report, the plane was shot down by a missile. No less than 298 passengers, including the crew, lost their lives in this tragic incident. Indonesian citizens are reported to be among the victims. Our prayers and thoughts are with the families. Throughout the evening and early morning today, I have been following with great concerns news relating to the incidents. Since the very beginning, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia has reported the development to me and has tasked the relevant Indonesian embassies, namely the embassies in the Netherlands, Malaysia, Ukraine, and the Russian Federation, to gather as much information as possible, including on the possibility of Indonesian citizens on board the flight. This effort revealed that Indonesian citizens were on board the aircraft. However, in accordance with the advice of the airline concerned, and in order to fully ensure the identity of the passengers and to allow notification to their next of kin, the government of Indonesia has been asked not to reveal their identities at this time. Further, there is a need for a thorough investigations on the cause of this tragedy. The international community should collectively address this incident. Not least, reports indicate that the plane was shot down by a missile related to the recent conflict situation in Ukraine. If this is proven, this would constitute a serious breach of international law and laws of war. Those responsible must be held fully accountable and be brought to justice. Indonesia calls for a thorough investigations of incident and is ready to join in any international investigation on that matter. Not least, this tragedy, the losses of innocent life, reminds of the urgent need for the conflict situation to be brought to an immediate end. Indonesia calls on all the relevant parties to set aside their differences and work toward a political settlement. I have also been informed by the foreign ministers of Indonesia that later on this morning, local time, the United Nations Security Council will consider this issue. I welcome this development. Also, in regard to this incident, I am instructing all Indonesian airlines to demonstrate utmost caution and avoid airspace over conflict areas. This should be coordinated with the government. And as a member of the ASEAN family, and in this holy month of Ramadan, I wish to express my solidarity with the government and people of Malaysia, and also with the countries whose citizens have fallen victims of this tragedy.
The Indonesian embassy in Kuala Lumpur have received information about 12 Indonesian passengers aboard the Malaysia Airlines Flight 17. However, there is still a possibility of an increase in the total number of Indonesian victims. The Indonesian embassy also coordinated with the Malaysia Airlines to facilitate for families of victims of MH17 plane.
The Indonesian embassy in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia last night received the news about the crash of Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 in eastern Ukraine close to the border with Russia during the flight from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur. The Service and Security Task Force of the Indonesian Embassy in Kuala Lumpur immediately coordinate with Indonesia embassies in Den Haag and Kiev, also other related parties in Malaysia, especially the Malaysia Airlines and Kuala Lumpur International Airport, for information about Indonesian passengers. The Indonesian Embassy in Kuala Lumpur stated in its press release on the information from Malaysian Airlines and Kuala Lumpur International Airport about the possibility of increase in the total number of Indonesian passenger victims because the identification of victims' nationality is not yet completed. Meantime, the data is still to be verified with the travel document number with related institutions in Indonesia. Based on the Malaysian Airlines and Kuala Lumpur International Airport's explanation, there is possibility for addition in the total of Indonesian passengers aboard the plane since the identification of the other victim's nationality is not yet completed. The Indonesia Embassy in Kuala Lumpur will remain to be in contact and coordinate with the Malaysian Airlines and the Kuala Lumpur International Airport to prepare for the next step to facilitate the family of the victims with any requirement regarding the deadly incident.
The Prime Minister of Malaysia, Najib Razak, demands swift justice for those responsible if a Malaysian airliner that came down in Ukraine was found to have been shut down.
Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak, reading out a statement at a news conference on Friday, said Malaysia had not been able to verify what caused the Boeing 777-200 to crash while on a flight from Amsterdam to the Malaysian capital Kuala Lumpur, but it had not made a distress call.
Malaysia is unable to verify the cause of this tragedy. But we must and we will find out precisely what happened to this flight. No stone will be left unturned. If it transpires that the plane was indeed shot down, we insist that the perpetrators must swiftly be brought to justice.
Najib admitted that he had agreed in talks with US President Barack Obama that investigators must get full access to the site of the crash. Ukraine accused terrorists, militants fighting to unite eastern Ukraine with Russia, of shooting down the plane. The rebels denied responsibility.
Ukraine investigates a downing of the Malaysian airliner, which killed all 295 people aboard and sharply raised the stakes in a conflict between Kiev and pro-Moscow rebels that has set Russia and West at daggers drawn.
Wreckage lay scattered in a field on Friday morning in eastern Ukraine as investigators and emergency officials probed the downing of a Malaysian airliner with 298 people on board over eastern Ukraine. There were no survivors from the Tuesday's crash, which left wreckage and bodies scattered across miles of rebel-held territory. The scale of the disaster could prove a turning point for international pressure to resolve the crisis in Ukraine, which has killed hundreds since protests toppled the Moscow-backed president in Kiev in February and Russia annexed the Crimea a month later. The United States called for an immediate ceasefire to allow easy access to the crash site, while pro-Russian separatists told the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe a security and rights body, they could ensure safe access for the international experts visiting the scene.
A website that collects real-time flight data of commercial air traffic shows civilian aircraft now skirting the area around eastern Ukraine following the crash of the Malaysian airliner, which killed 298 people.
The FlightRadar24.com website, which displays the position of aircraft around the world, showed Asia-bound traffic from Europe now flying over Russia on the other side of the border with eastern Ukraine, where pro-Russian separatists are fighting government forces. U.S. Vice President Joe Biden has said the plane was blown out of the sky, but rebels have denied any wrongdoings, although they have recently said they possess missiles capable of downing an aircraft flying at high altitude. Several major airlines have announced they are avoiding eastern Ukrainian airspace since the crash of the Amsterdam-Kuala Lumpur flight.
Meanwhile, Australia's Foreign Minister Julie Bishop calls for full international inquiry into crash of the Malaysian airline flight MH17 in eastern Ukraine.
This is a terrible tragedy.
The Malaysia Airlines Boeing 777 on a flight from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur came down in eastern Ukraine, killing all 298 people on board. Australian Foreign Minister Julie Bishop confirmed that 27 Australians were among the 295 passengers on the flight, making Australians the second largest national grouping behind the Dutch on board the plane.
Regardless of the circumstances, we urge the separatists to cooperate with an investigation into this crash. If they have taken the black box, that must be returned to authorities immediately. This incident underlines the urgent need to de-escalate the tensions and the situation in eastern Ukraine.
Ukrainian authorities have accused terrorist militants fighting to unite eastern Ukraine with Russia of shooting down the Boeing 777-200. The rebels denied responsibility.
India's Civil Aviation Minister Ashok Gajapati Raju says the government has alerted its airlines to avoid Ukraine following the downing of the Malaysian airliner over the conflict-ridden state's airspace. Meantime, newspapers in the Netherlands say the crash of the Malaysian airliner carrying many Dutch passengers was one of the worst air disasters in the country's history.
The Boeing 777 on a flight from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur came down in the Donetsk region of Ukraine near the Russian border on Thursday. Malaysia Airlines flight MH17, which was operating as a code-share flight with the Dutch flagship carrier KLM, was carrying at least 154 Dutch citizens, at least 27 Australians, 23 Malaysians, 11 Indonesians, 6 Britons, 4 Germans, 4 Belgians, 3 Filipinos and 1 Canadian. India's Civil Aviation Minister Ashok Gajapati Raju said there were no Indians on the crash airliner. He added that India has alerted its own airlines, Jet or Air India, to avoid Ukraine as of now. Meantime, there were no survivors from the crash, which left wreckage and bodies scattered across miles of rebel-held territory. There were 298 people on board. Volkskrant newspaper called it one of the worst air disasters in Dutch history. Ukraine and Russia have blamed each other for the crash amid conflict between the two nations. The plane crashed about 40 kilometers from the border with Russia near the regional capital of Donetsk, an area that is a stronghold of rebels who have been fighting Ukrainian government forces. Ukraine accused pro-Moscow militants aided by Russian military intelligence officers of firing a long-range Soviet-era SA-11 ground-to-air missile.
To our next report, President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono stated that the international world must stay focused and serious in responding to the intensifying situation in the Gaza Strip following Israel's land and air strikes on Gaza.
Indonesia wishes to once again express its deep and profound concerns over the rapidly worsening situation in Gaza. Far from engaging in a ceasefire, as expected by the international community, Israel has decided to launch a ground military operations. We deplore such We deplore such escalation of the conflict and once again, call for an immediate ceasefire to be observed by the United Nations, the ending of the cycle of violence, and the distributions of humanitarian assistance. Israel's ground military operation can only add to the suffering of the Palestinian people, and must be brought to an immediate end. Thank you very much.
Casualties arrive at Gaza hospitals as the death toll rises from Israel's ground offensive. Meantime, Israeli army releases video, it says, showing ground troops crossing into Gaza overnight.
Palestinian health officials said 23 Palestinians had been killed since Israel launched its ground offensive against the densely populated strip of 1.8 million Palestinians. Israel said one of the soldiers had been killed in fighting. Casualties arrived at a hospital in Khan Yunis on Friday morning, where bodies were taken to the morgue. Family members mourned their losses in the hospital corridors and on the pavement outside. The current conflict was largely triggered by the killing of 3 Israeli teens in the occupied West Bank last month and the death on July the 2nd of a Palestinian youth in a suspected revenge murder. Meantime, a video clip released by the Israeli military showed 6 tanks rolling in through the sand dunes of Gaza after a soldier opened a border fence and long rows of foot soldiers. Israel announced its first military fatality of an 11-day Gaza offensive, and 23 Palestinians were reported killed in the coastal enclave hours after Israel launched a ground offensive. Explosions lit up the sky in the early hours, and residents in several areas of the densely populated strip of 1.8 million Palestinians said they saw small numbers of Israeli tanks that had crossed the border from Israel. A military spokeswoman said at least 20 more rockets were fired at Israel on Friday.
Residents in the Philippines assess the damage from Typhoon Rasmussen, with hundreds still staying in evacuation centers. At least 54 people have died and 3 are reported missing.
Residents in the Philippines repaired houses and began assessing damage to infrastructure after Typhoon Rasmussen swept across the country. 54 people have died and 3 are reported missing. The storm destroyed about 7,000 houses and damaged 19,000, the executive director of the National Disaster Agency, Alexander Palma, said. More than 530,000 people had taken refuge in evacuation centers. Repair work started in Batangas province, south of Manila, for a bridge that is the vital trade route connecting the province to nearby towns. Hundreds of evacuees in the city of Muntinlupa continue to stay inside the town hall. The national government said they have allotted funds to help with the recovery of the typhoon victims. Parts of the Philippines are still recovering from Typhoon Haiyan, one of the biggest cyclones known to have made landfalls anywhere.
And we still have more news after the short break when we come back.
Reaching you in the morning in Indonesia Pagi.
Selamat pagi saudara, kembali Indonesia Pagi TVRI menjumpai Anda hari
Presenting the latest updates nationwide. Updates on series of events from morning to the afternoon in Indonesia Siang.
Indonesia Siang kembali hadir dengan
A full series of events from morning to the evening in Indonesia Malam.
TVRI kembali hadir ke
TVRI, one channel, one nation.
We'll continue with our reports. Former Minister of Youth and Sport Andi Malarangeng was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment and a fine of 200 million rupiah with subsidiary 2 months detainment. Andi was found guilty in the Hambalang Sport construction project graft scandal in Bogor, West Java.
Judge Leader Haswandi delivered the sentencing on Andi Malarangeng at the Jakarta Corruption Court today and stated that Andi was found guilty of collective graft scandals. Andi Malarangeng has been proven to misuse his authority as minister in the Hambalang Sports Center project. As the Minister of Youth and Sports served at the time, Andi should have been able to oversee all of the ministry's program and projects under his tenure as minister. Wafid Muharram, former Secretary of Youth and Sports Minister, was proven to have signed the winning bidder form for the PT Adikarya and PT Wijaya Karya, which was ratified in the Adi Wika operation contract. The contract should be given by Minister Andi Malarangeng as ruled on the Presidential Decree number 80, year 2003. The project, according to the judges, has benefited specific parties. As earlier revealed, PT Adikarya handed over money to a number of parties, including, among others, Anas Urbaningrum, Wafid Muharram, Mahyuddin, Dedikus Dinar, and other names to make a number of documents for the project, including permits and retribution. The project was said to have caused a state loss of 464.391 billion rupiah.
The Jakarta police will hold a security simulation in securing the KPU's announcement of the presidential election result at the National Election Commission office. The announcement is to be announced tomorrow. The simulation aims to sterilize the KPU office when the announcement is being delivered. Simulation for securing the KPU office was held inside the KPU building and the KPU surrounding area. Despite prohibiting members of the public to be inside the KPU office environment, the Jakarta police also forbids mass organizations to hold any form of activity around the KPU office. To avoid chaos, especially from both supporters of the two presidential candidates, Deputy Chief of the Jakarta Police, Brigadier General Sujarno, explained that the security system applied for the KPU office will be divided into a number of rings. The simulation tomorrow will involve a large crowd nearby the KPU office and traffic on the Jalan Imam Bonjol, Diponegoro, Kuningan, Tugutani area in central Jakarta. The crowd is predicted to last about an hour. TNI Commander General Muldoko affirms that TNI is committed in safeguarding the presidential election process.
General Muldoko, the TNI High Commander, accompanied by Army Chief of Staff, along with other TNI high officers, inspected the TNI's simulation training of releasing hostages held by terrorists this morning at the TNI headquarters in Cilangkap, East Jakarta. To prevent speculations, the TNI have accounted any possibilities of threats in the simulation training. Responding on the latest political situation in the country, the TNI commander instructed for all TNI troops to stay alert and ready. General Muldoko said that the TNI puts KPU in the position as a national strategic object which required full protection. Muldoko appeals for the public to remain calm for any possibilities. Today's training also involves securing ballot boxes, implicating 10 helicopters and 64 personnel from all the special forces, namely Kostrad, Kopassus, Marines, and the Special Squad.
Until now, several areas are still organizing re-election, like Jakarta, for example. The KPU stated the deadline for the re-election vote is due before the national recapitulation on July 20 to July 22nd.
KPU Chairman Husni Kamil Manik said in the re-election law and implementation regulation, the latest re-election vote is to be held at least 10 days after the election, and the deadline is on July the 19th. According to him, after the set-out date, there should be no more re-election voting. KPU cannot do anything about complaints and objection reports of the re-election, which comes after the July 19th. Husni Kamil Manik went on to say that so far the re-election have been running well and did not interfere with the tiered recapitulation process by the KPU. Meanwhile, the Jakarta KPU postponed today's recapitulation because there are re-election in 16 ballot stations which will be implemented by tomorrow. Head of Jakarta KPU Sumarno said that the re-election is held due to violation allegation to the KPU Regulation Number 19-2014, Article 11, relating with voters who are failing the administration terms. Sumarno admitted that the re-election is a follow-up of the presidential hopeful couple number 1 claim to the Bawaslu. Bawaslu conducted a research and delivered its recommendation for Jakarta KPU to implement the re-election.
Going over to Japan, Thomas at Tokyo's themed cafe have lunch with stuffed toys from Moomin, a comic and book series that originated in Finland.
At Tokyo's Moomin Cafe, cups of tea and coffee come with their own stuffed characters that keep guests company during their meals. The cafe originally started in 2003. Whenever customers come in, staff members would grab a Moomin character and place them to sit with the guest. The Moomin series, originally created by Finnish illustrator and writer Toffe Johansson, has a large fan base in Japan. Even those who are not fans are converted by the concept of the cafe. I'm not the type of person who keeps stuffed animals at home. Given this chance though, I'd definitely choose to sit with them. At first, Moomin Mama was sitting at a different table. When I came back from buying some bread though, it was sitting here beside my seat. It makes me happy that they actually think of things like that. Jansson, who died in 2001, said her own experiences were the basis for her work, and the experience of war may be one distinguishing factor making Europeans and Japanese susceptible to her sense of shyness and feelings of disasters.
In London, a homeless man and his dog have become an overnight sensation in the London art world as the duo prepare for the opening of the exhibition, John and George in Shoreditch.
The phrase "a dog is a man's best friend" rings true for Shoreditch artist John Dolan, who found his way out of homelessness, crime and drugs thanks to his canine friend George. Dolan began going off the rails when he started getting involved in drugs. Soon he found his way into crime and subsequently prison, then became homeless man on the streets of East London after. However, his life turned around when a fellow homeless girl brought back a puppy after being offered to him for the price of a can of beer. George then inspired him to pick up a pen and paper and explore his artistic talent.
So when I first got George, he was hand shy. He was quite an aggressive dog. He would growl at you, and he was a cat chaser. He was weary of people, and when I started training him, within a month of me starting to train him, his personality changed. He became just a really pleasant dog.
The book about Dolan's life, John and George, the dog who saved my life, is also on sale now.
And that ends today's news. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more news and reports on CBRI. I'm Doni Kusman Haji. Thank you for watching. Until next time.